Jeremy Saucier, welcome to the Game Informer Show, sir.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Honored to have you. Where are we right now?
We are in the Strong Museum in Rochester, New York. You're in our iChegg lab, which iChegg stands for the International Center for the History of Electronic Games.
Okay, and off camera, people can't see it, there's a cage with old Mario statues, a bunch of old Apple IIs, everything interesting if you're a video game dork.
Yes, we have a collection, just the video game side of the museum. We have a collection of more than 60,000 games and related objects, and we also have hundreds of thousands of archival materials, so documentation related to the games and the video game industry.
Have you ever had this priced out? Like, how much is it worth?
you can rob the place, Reese? What's going on here?
Oh, theoretically, when are you guys not around?
So when a collections item actually comes into the museum, part of the cataloging process is for us to add an appraisal, and maybe the purchase price if it's something that we've acquired through purchase, or it may be that we have to appraise an item as it comes in. But no, we haven't appraised the entire collection, for what it's worth. But
sure.
Yeah.
What does that involve, though? You just look up eBay prices, or like how do you decide like what's this going rate on this thing?
Yeah, so I mean, appraisal is done in a variety of ways, but it's a lot of it is it's establishing what fair market value is, and so if you were to insure something, you'd want to look at what's the higher end of something that if I was to have to replace it. And obviously, there are things at the museum that are not replaceable, which is part of the reason why it's so important for them to be here.
Yeah. Can you just set the scene for the overall Strong Museum? Just what is it? When was it established? What's its goal? What's going on here?
Sure. So the Strong Museum, it's the National Museum of Play, and it's the only collections-based museum anywhere in the world that's dedicated solely to the study and the exploration of play. Now, what that means as a collections-based museum, it means that we care for a collection of objects and documentation, as I noted about video games, but we do that more broadly for playthings. So we care for the world's largest and most comprehensive collection of playthings, nearly 500,000 objects. So everything from toys to dolls to board games to video games we have here at the Strong.
How do you define play? It's going to be so hard.
So it's funny that defining play is actually something that scholars have struggled with for more than 100 years. The most prominent play scholar of the late 20th century, scholar named Brian Sutton Smith, who our Library and Archive is actually named after, he would talk about defining play, that often when we try to define play, we fall into silliness, right? And it gets at this struggle that we all have. And so in some fields, right? So if you're in neuroscience, you might define play in a different way than if you were in sociology or in anthropology. So sometimes it's based on the field that you're in. But here at the museum, we take a broad view of play. We think about play as being really in the eye of the beholder. So to you, play might be working in your garden. Right. To me, play might be playing with My Little Ponies with my daughter. So I don't think it's impossible, but it creates a large box for us to work with. But it does make it a challenge in terms of documenting and preserving that history.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but you have a stick in your museum.
Not just in the museum; it's in the National Toy Hall of Fame.
Toy Hall of Fame is a stick.
Yes, we
amazing.
And that's not the only stick on display. We have several sticks. Yeah, the stick is in the National Toy Hall of Fame, and our National Toy Hall of Fame, just to give a little bit of context, inducts 2 or 3 toys into the Hall of Fame each year. And in the past, it's inducted things that everyone knows, but doesn't necessarily think of as a plaything, like the stick or a cardboard box. I certainly have had the experience of buying gifts for my children when they were little,
Yeah.
and then playing with the box for
100%.
hours.
Wait, so the cardboard box is also in the Hall of Fame?
The cardboard box is
Oh,
also
no.
Kojima would be
That's
so happy.
He's very
yes. So yeah, the stick, the cardboard box, the blanket, right? That these are objects
so
that
smart.
Yeah.
that propel the imagination, right? That a blanket can be, it can, I can play a tea set, and put a blanket down, to play with my daughter or to do a picnic. At the same time, I can tie a blanket, around my neck and be a superhero.
Yeah.
With that
That's
toy
pretty
Hall of
good.
Fame thing, what are those debates like? I mean, are you guys sitting around a boardroom and someone raises their hand and says, what about just like a ball? Just a good vanilla ball, and then people have to argue why the ball may
Why
or may
ball
not.
should or not, should
Yeah.
not?
It's so absurd.
So, well, the ball is, of course,
it's
in
in
the
there.
National
It's number
Hall of
one
Fame.
toy.
And
Yeah.
in fact, a couple of summers ago, we actually had a ball exhibit called "Have a Ball." It was, and it was a temporary exhibit that focused specifically on the history and the sort of the kind of play, the development of ball play.
That's so
But yeah, part of that process is, of course, that the public, that people who play with toys, people who are kids at heart, who remember the toys from their childhood, they nominate toys each year, and internally we look at the criteria and bring it down to a group of finalists. And so as part of that, absolutely, there's a lot of discussion. We're certainly very playful here, but you might be surprised at how how dedicated and how emotional that can be sometimes.
I don't think we'd be surprised. We work at Game Informer and
Yeah.
trying to argue about like the top games of the year everywhere.
We're a bunch of idiots.
It really gets absurd. Like we almost came to blows when arguing robots versus mechs and what counted as a mech versus a robot.
It was
genuinely
10
people
minutes.
pissed, like leaving work angry that day.
You
about the
cannot
definition
call
of
this a
mech.
robot. We will get raked over the coals.
You need to be able to climb inside that machinery.
Well, and even just defining, as you said, what's a toy and what would fit
Right.
into our conception of a toy. We had similar conversations when we did an exhibit. Right now, we have an exhibit on science fiction play, and boy, getting into conversations about what counts as science fiction.
Oh
is,
my God! Because there's those people out there that say Star Wars not sci-fi.
Yep.
Doesn't count.
Yep.
I am not one of those people, but
Okay.
I definitely had some heated arguments with some of our other curators, our video game curator.
Oh,
that kind of
really?
stuff.
Interesting.
right.
How do you guys go about selecting the box that's going in the Hall of Fame? Do you just order something off of Amazon and like, here's a box, or
You mean for like
Like
here's
the
our copy of
display.
Fallout 4?
well, just,
You're talking
no,
about
no.
the cardboard
I just
box.
meant the cardboard
literally
box.
the box.
Literally the
Okay.
box. Like it's such a like what's the box that represents all boxes on that display?
Well, so the short answer to that is that often what happens is that in some ways what you're doing when something gets inducted into the Hall of Fame is that you're creating a kind of canon. So when something is inducted into our Hall of Fame, it's then that we need to collect very deliberately around it. And so our curators will identify, it may be that, as you said, an Amazon box is a kind of iconic box, right?
Yeah.
We all shop at it. We all pretty much shop at Amazon, so we've all seen the boxes, and some of them we keep and play with, and other ones go right into the recycling.
You're not running to the recycling after that and be like, wait a minute, you guys are throwing away history. What are you doing?
No, some of that may happen sometimes. Certainly not from me, but on the other side of that is that when you think about objects as each object having a story, right? And so we think of objects that have a provenance, right? So it may be that we have a box that a kid in the Rochester area turned into a spaceship. And having inducted the cardboard box, his parents were like, I wonder if the museum would be interested in, taking your cardboard box that you turned into a spaceship.
So strange.
That is cool.
And then also the kind of documentation where, people take photographs of their children playing with boxes, videos on YouTube of kids turning boxes into, to play house,
Yeah.
those
Right.
kinds of things. So there's all kinds of creative ways to document that kind of play.
You guys have so many things. We just went for like a quick tour. So many arcade machines. You got everything you could ever want. Old pinball stuff. Where does it all come from? How does this work?
So our collections come from a variety of places. One thing we should do is a step back here and to say that, so the Strong Museum is currently about play, but it hasn't always been. And the history of the museum is interesting in that it was founded by a woman named Margaret Woodbury Strong. She was from Rochester originally. Because often people will say, like, why a museum of play? Why video games in Rochester, New York? And it really goes back to our founder. And Margaret came from a very wealthy background. Her maternal grandfather had made his money in the buggy whip industry.
Whip?
Yes, the buggy whip industry. Big industry. So she grew up, her childhood, she spent a lot of time traveling the world and she collected things. And so collecting was play for her. But in 1968, she, having built up this collection of toys and dolls from around the world and other items, she went to the New York Board of Regents and asked for a charter for a museum of what she called at the time a museum of fascination. Now, unfortunately, Margaret passed away in 1969, and so she was never able to act really upon the museum in the way that maybe she imagined it. And so if you fast forward to 1982, when we first opened as a museum, we were a museum that was more of a traditional history museum. We focused on a mission that was really to document and explore the impact of industrialization on everyday life in America.
The least fun topic.
Between 1865 and 1945.
Specifically between those years?
Yes.
Interesting.
Wow. So that's how the museum started, and so we had these.
And now you have a Mario Maker exhibit. What the hell?
So and all of that is to say that our collection started from Margaret's personal collection of things, which we had this world-class collections of toys and dolls. But when you start a museum, what they had done was brought in consultants who were scholars and museum curators who looked at the collection, and pretty much across the board, they all noted the fact that we had this great collection of toys and dolls, but none of them could really they couldn't imagine a museum that was about play. They couldn't imagine a museum about toys.
Who's going to want to go see this?
Yeah,
There's a bunch of dumb toys. Come on.
How rare are play museums? Is that even a category?
Again, we're very rare because we're the only museum really like this in the world. There have been video game museums that have popped up, and there are more and more that are. Now you're seeing them in Japan, Germany, other parts of the United States, but it's very unique, and it's part of the reason why when we looked, it wasn't simply our CEO at the time saying, let's do something unique. It was really going back. Our CEO at the time, Raleigh Adams, who was really the visionary for this, had really gone back and looked at those initial studies and those consultation reports, and really thinking about, this museum should have been about play all along.
Idiots! What are you guys doing?
It was really him who brought, people at the Strong to really see that vision and bring the community to see that vision.
I'm just curious, just like walking through, like parts of the museum feel a bit like a children's museum because you got like the miniature supermarket and things for people to actually play on, which is cool. Do you guys feel like how do you appeal to kids, but then also adults? Do you feel like adults are like having a good time here too? Are they as interested in toy or play as I would think they might be? As we are, as
you are,
big children.
Yeah. So we come from the philosophy that that we play throughout our lives. Right? That play plays a major part in human growth and development. Right? You think of the time that you're a baby, the way that we first learn about the world, how we explore the world, is actually through play, right? When we're playing peekaboo with our children, when we play, we roll a ball back and forth. You're developing dexterity and even trunk control, and there's physical, there's emotional, language. All that stuff really starts with play. But we know that we play throughout our lives. Now, sometimes as we get older, we play less, and play tends to be associated with children because they have more time. So we joke here at the museum that, of course, you tell people that you work at the Museum of Play, they're like, oh, so you get to play all day. I'm sure you guys get to, you play
100%.
video games all day long. So, of course, that's not the case. But we offer things in our exhibits that really blend our strengths in our collection. So these artifacts, our interpretation, right? So trying to take these playthings, these games, and talking about sometimes that provenance, so that the importance of that individual item, because it might be that it was something that was used to create an iconic game, or it might be the prototype for Tickle Me Elmo that we have on display downstairs. But it also may be that we want to put it within the context of the history of play, and even a broader context, a broader cultural and social context. So that appeals obviously more to adults, but it's a cross-generational experience. We make all of our exhibits interactive, and we really believe that people come here, and hey, if they want to come and they want to look at the artifacts and they don't play at all, that's okay. If they want to come and they don't read every label, they don't explore every single thing that's written down, or every interpretive interactive, that's okay.
Right.
And if they play, that's great too, because people learn through play.
It's gonna be so much fun just to not in a creepy way, but like watch everyone go through this museum, and like especially with multiple generations, I'm sure like grandparents are bringing their kids and just like or grandkids and seeing how they split up, like seeing the grandparents go over to like the old Mickey Mouse toy, I'm sure, whereas the kids are running over to Berenstain Bears or whatever the hell is going on over there.
Yes, I mean, and we see it every day. I mean, it really, it's both inspiring, and it's also really gratifying to see that, because on one level it's an educational experience. On another level, it's deeply personal, because I've not met a person who's come here and I've spoken with who hasn't said, well, I had that, or oh, the kid down the street from me had that and I wanted that. Totally. And he never let me play with it.
Now you're going to let me play with it and break the glass.
Finally.
But yeah, we do. We often see, I remember again, as you said, not in a creepy way, seeing a grandparent with her granddaughter looking at some old dolls, and her commenting on, Grammy had this when she was a kid, and her granddaughter actually said, they had toys when you were a kid?
That's so good.
Which her face was just like, great.
That's crazy.
But so people come here to have those kinds of experience, but people come here to play with their kids. Totally. Sometimes they just step back, as you were pointing out that we have an exhibit that on really shopping, grocery, a Wegmans grocery store, where it's that sort of role playing, right? The kids who want to do things that are very adult. I take my kids to Wegmans, I put them in the cart, or they walk through, and they want to grab everything, right? They want all the sugary cereals, they want all the, so this actually allows them the ability to do that, and we have the actual cash registers from Wegmans in there, so they get their receipt.
That's so cool that they get a receipt too. I'm sure they love that. You guys have a ton of artifacts, which is cool, but it's fascinating because you guys have stuff that's like, you wouldn't initially think it would be in a toy museum, like you have a computer from John Romero that he programmed on before he made Doom. So, or like you have like architectural plans, or what looks like architectural plans for pinball machines. So how important is it to you guys to have that stuff that's like not just the artifact, but also the stuff behind the making of it and the creation? Yeah. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's vitally important, and we really we take a broad approach to collecting. So if we talk about the history of video games in particular, and we take an approach where we look at, okay, we want to have the games themselves, right? There's the physical media. And there's a lot that we can learn from those, right? We can look at the packages, we can look at the media itself, but ultimately, it's the game on that media that is the experience. And so we know that even just having that physical game, eventually that game's not going to work, and so it will be a non-usable artifact. So with all of that in mind, you have to collect other things that help provide you further context. So we have a collection of tens of thousands of magazines like Game Informer and computer, toy industry, video game industry magazines that researchers come and use quite frequently. We also, again, will collect archival items, as you noted, and so we have collections that are more industrial in the sense that they came from a company. So in the case of the pinball playfield drawings, these were a group of drawings that were donated from WMS, who's now owned by Scientific Games, but these were drawings that go back to the founding of the company, right? So if there are anything close to founding documents for Williams, which was a company that innovated in that space, these are those documents. And so it helps to show not only how these games were created, but also the kinds of conversations that happened. Sometimes it's as you see from these pinball documents, where you're seeing people erasing and redrawing things. It's a conversation that's even happening internally with yourself. So we have those kinds of materials. We also have personal papers from people like Ralph Baer, who created the Magnavox Odyssey, really the father of home video games. Also Simon. So we have papers related to his work. Will Wright, Roberta and Ken Williams from Sierra. A number of personal papers and larger company collections. And then also we look at, again, if you cover sort of the physical media, the archival materials, but then eventually you're not going to have the physical to play. And so what we've done is that then we look at digital preservation. And we've done that in a couple of different ways. One being a video capture project where we have gone through and at this point have captured about 4,000 different games spanning consoles and PC from the 70s through the mid 2000s. And this was a grant-funded, a government-sponsored project that we did.
I love the idea of having that much pressure on the person capturing the gameplay. Like, all right, this is the historical documented version of Frogger.
Yeah, we had a lot of conversations.
Don't look like an asshole.
We had a lot of conversations about that. It's like, how do you capture? What does it mean to capture the essence of Pac-Man versus the essence of civilization, which is this much longer game. So it's so that was certainly a challenge. We were really trying to develop a systematic approach to how do you do this, and if a museum was to try to do this with their collection, how would you go about doing that? And then lastly, we look at migration of digital media and the preservation of source code when we have it. And so sometimes that's migrating stuff from digital media, sometimes that's preserving printouts of source code.
I want to know how you get this stuff. Like you mentioned earlier that Romero was just wandering the museum late at night.
No,
he's checking out He's checking out the museum. Then he's like, "Oh, you guys should have my Apple too. That'd be so cool." Yeah. I mean, is it a lot of just those weird off-the-cuff things? Is it someone coming by and saying, like, I used to work for Activision. I think I have some source code lying around. I'll just give it to you. Like, how loose is that donation process? And what are you hunting down? Like, what's the ideal case that you want to bring in?
Yeah, and I mean, it's really it's a combination of things. There's a there's we approach it from really a systematic way. So our curators think about what are things that are gaps in our collections, what are major things that have happened in the video game industry that we want to document, and so we may look to reaching out to certain people. So both internally, you have people who are kind of systematically looking at that, but then externally, as we've grown, we've had tremendous support from people who have really wanted to see their documentation or their games preserved. So sometimes it's a person who, like Doug Carlson, for instance, who one of the founders of Broderbund. He donated a collection of pretty much one of every single thing that Broderbund ever published.
Wow.
So several thousand games, but also his personal papers that really showed this kind of, it was this time capsule of the industry at that moment.
Yeah.
But then you have collectors, right? Collectors play a really important role, because if you look at the history of museums, across the world, oftentimes collectors value things before museums. Usually museums catch up.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
And so before a museum comes along to collect playthings, of course there have been people collecting toys and dolls and even video games before us. And so collectors play a really important role in that, we're always in conversation with collectors who are, hey, I have these kinds of materials, I have, these games, I really would love to see those be preserved, I'd really love to see those be part of the museum. So it's really, I think, the work internally of the museum staff, who does a tremendous job seeking out and filling in gaps in our collection and looking at what things really we need to have, creating relationships with people in the industry, right, and finding those opportunities where someone like John Romero says, hey, I want the Apple II that I started programming on, here in the Strong, and then the collectors who have who have found those things and found value in them before others.
What's too small for the museum? Like, I'm imagining some game designer walking through and being like, you know what you need? You need my notebooks. And it's like, all right, dude. Like, you programmed on Madden 96 for half a year. Like, I think we're good. Like, but will you just take everything like that?
Well, I think the short answer is all of that stuff is a conversation.
Okay.
When you first said what's too small for the museum, it was funny because the first thing I thought was like, we have thousands of pieces of miniature furniture that go into dollhouses. So there's nothing really too small for the museum. But if you've worked on a game and you've participated in creating a game, there's a story and you're part of that history. So one thing that I hope you'll have the opportunity to talk with our video game curator, my colleague who leads our Women in Games initiative. One of the things that we really wanted to look at there is that women have been a part of the game industry since the very beginning, and it goes back to the 19th century where you've got women creating some of the most popular games like the Game of Authors, so women have been a part of that, but also you've had women who have worked on factory floors. You had women who, if you come to an exhibit that we have out right now on jigsaw puzzles, there are many women who hand cut jigsaw puzzles. So women had important roles in marketing, in sales. So across the board, there are peoples whose stories and whose materials help us get a richer, more full, and inclusive history of video games. I think that's what we're always striving for. So it's not just a game design centric and auteur sort of view of video games. It's thinking about it also as it's a production, and even thinking too, how do we document what players, how people are purely these games, the cultures around that, which is a monumental challenge. If it's not challenging enough to try to document, purely digital games and all these other things. So I guess to answer your question, I don't know if there's anything too small, but it's always worth a conversation. Obviously, if you come in with your, with a copy of your cartridge of Pac-Man from the 2600, we have many copies of that, and we would probably evaluate it and say, okay, this isn't in better condition than what we have, and
I got my personal notebook has some Serious Sam notes on it from E3. Like, do you want to display this maybe next to the
just right on top computer? Just covering Romero's computer. I think is the ideal spot.
Hey, I someday there may be a Game Informer exhibit, right? We could do an exhibit about game journalism, right?
I'll let you stuff Ben Reed and put him in that exhibit.
If you think about the importance that game journalism plays in both, communicating, what's happening in the industry, but also actually in contributing to gaming culture. I mean, so much of what the magazines tell us when we go back is they do help us get at how are these games played.
Yeah.
I mean, Nintendo Power was created out of Nintendo itself and trying to reach the audience of their players, and so as a sort of tool of marketing, but also communication.
Is the overall lesson, and this mainly for people in the video game industry, for your case, I guess, but just overall, like, hey everybody, just document everything. Don't ever throw anything away. Create like a very careful index of everything you have. No moment's too small for your entire life. Is that the takeaway here?
I don't think that that I can ask those things. I think realistically, we all have jobs, and my job, at least part of my job, is to help collect, preserve, and interpret the history of electronic games. But I realize that someone working at Activision, or a game designer, or someone working on the factory floor of Williams Pinball in 1946 or 47 isn't necessarily their first priority is not to document the things that they're doing for generations to be able to study. And so understand that, we understand that, and so while at the same time that we would say, hey, please don't throw that away, we also understand that you're not going to keep everything, and that you can come to us with a box of materials. We can have a conversation about a truckload of materials, which is actually, we have a collection of Atari coin-op materials, things that are basically the corporate records left over from Atari's coin-op divisions, and that came on a tractor trailer, 23 pallets of materials. And so, so there's a wide range of things that
there's that story out there though, like the people who found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they like took them and they burned some of them that night to like cook their food.
Oh,
like,
really?
So there's probably there's stuff like similar of equal significance and historical value for video games that are probably like, people don't recognize what they have, and they're not obviously going to treat it with any kind of like reverence.
Right.
So like there's got to be that fear in your mind.
Like even if like Ralph Baer's kids like didn't give a crap, about his job. Thankfully they did, and then you had that wonderful exhibit because of that,
Yeah, and I mean, I think in any, in any cultural heritage area, you have to imagine that there's going to be acceptable loss, right? Now, and it depends on the person. Jason Scott at the Internet Archive is very much of like, save everything, digitize everything.
Isn't his motto steal from work as well?
Steal from work,
Just a very good motto.
So people have different, different approaches and different perspectives on this. But I think as a historian, I take a really long view of things, and so as you're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, I mean, if you think of, some of the stuff that we're dealing with when we start to think about ancient civilizations, we're looking at archaeological evidence, right? We're making guesses about the way that something operated and the way that people lived based on the evidence that we have. So now we have, if we take video games as an example, we have sort of this dual problem of in the modern age, there's so much information that how do you, back to your question of anything so small? Well, to look at everything in our archive would take months and months and years.
Oh gosh, we better get started.
So you have the problem of there's sort of information overload, because we're all dealing with just the amount of every email, every text message, every time you do something, but also at the same time that all of that is also very ephemeral, right? And that to some people there's this sort of false sense that, it's on the internet, so it's out there and it will be there, and someone digitized it and put it out there. So just because something's on YouTube doesn't mean that 100 years from now we're going to have that video. It may not mean that 3 years from now we'll have that video.
Are you guys working with other museums then to kind of like tag team for some of this stuff, or do you ever feel, I know the Smithsonian has their video game guys, and there's the video game museum guys in Texas. Do you guys feel that, or do you ever coordinate with those guys? Like, hey, we should preserve this, you guys preserve that? Or does it ever feel like a competition? Like, oh, we got Will Wright's notebooks and the Smithsonian got the,
Well, it doesn't get quite that, we don't have those kinds of,
For burning them to cook our food, Texas.
No, I think that that we all work kind of separately, but we're all aware of what we're doing, and so I think I can speak for myself and ourselves as an institution that we identify what are the things that we do well, what are the things that we can do better at, and so sometimes it's you specialize in certain areas, and it's also that we take different perspectives, right? The National Video Game Museum, their focus is on video games, and in a particular, they may have an interpretive focus that is different than ours, right? We're broadly looking at the history of play. So the lens that we see through all the artifacts, all the objects and the documentation in the museum is through this lens of play, whereas the Smithsonian is really looking from technology, and other museums will take various perspectives. So so a lot of it is approaching sometimes the same subjects, but in different ways. But I don't. We certainly don't. We all talk to each other, but we certainly don't get on the phone and say, "Hey, we got Will Wright's notebooks."
But there's never like a bidding war or something for like a rare artifact that comes along.
Not that I'm aware of.
Oh, really? Okay. So you guys are you're expanding out the museum in a big way.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you're going to have what exactly is going to be in the huge new exhibit? What is that thing?
So we are currently working on a 100,000 square foot expansion, and it's part of a larger project where we have this just incredible opportunity to transform a city neighborhood. And within that 100,000 square feet, we will have a new kind of welcome center into the museum, but also we'll have two major exhibits. One that will be the home of the World Video Game Hall of Fame, and so it'll be an interpretive gallery that looks at video games and their impact on culture and society, and then also a second exhibit that will be more of an immersive video game, right? So that you are going into and you're doing physical things that are, so maybe you're solving puzzles, you're playing a shooter game, but you're doing it physically, so that it's a sort of immersive physical and digital experience.
It's like you're in the movies, Reese.
Oh,
It'll
perfect.
Like that. Wait, so are you moving all your video game
set.
stuff to this new wing, or I'm confused about like what the Hall of Fame for video games, how that would really differentiate itself from the wonderful video game exhibits you already have.
Yeah, so to help you contextualize this a little bit, when we moved to a play mission in 2003, when the museum became about play, we realized pretty quickly that we were not collecting video games in a serious, systematic way. We had a few dozen video games, even though we knew and we could see that video games were changing the way that we played, changing the way that we learn, we connect with each other.
And I imagine a lot of people are coming in for the video games,
Right, and so at that time, that's where we founded our International Center for the History of Electronic Games in 2009, and then later on in 2015, we would then sort of expand our footprint in that area with the World Video Game Hall of Fame. So our exhibits now, which we have a number of exhibits, our E-Game Revolution exhibit, which focuses on the history of electronic games. We have Pinball Playfields, which gets at the history of pinball. And then also we have other exhibits that feed into, that help us understand and contextualize video games. What this will do is provide a sort of expansive view of video games. So not everything will necessarily disappear from the rest of the museum, because what we are at our core is about play. And so part of that is understanding that video games are both revolutionary, but they're also evolutionary. And that when we play Halo or play Doom, is it fundamentally a different play than when you're kids and you're playing cops and robbers in the backyard?
Right.
Is the text-based adventure and the adventure games that we play later, is that fundamentally different than the choose-your-own-adventure books that we read and the kinds of adventures that we played in our neighborhoods? Pac-Man is a chase game. It's like playing tag. And so all of our exhibits are going to help to tell that story. We play in a variety of ways, but the new expansion will focus primarily on that. But I should mention too that we'll be creating at the moment. We have a garden outside of the museum where we talk about outdoor play. But we will, in order to build a massive parking garage, we will need to relocate the garden, and we're going to create an entirely new outdoor play space.
Okay.
Right. So for those who really aren't very interested in video games, at least not in playing them, maybe they can come here. They can play outside. Learn about nature play, playing in the outdoors.
Right. Or even the parking garage can be fun.
Oh,
Yes.
I
A
love
lot of kids
parking.
love
And we will have a very playful parking garage.
Okay,
I
good.
I think
promise
you should add that to the Hall of Fame, parking garage.
parking garage.
One of my favorite.
If you'd like to nominate that to the National Toy Hall of Fame,
Every year you come in with parking garage. It's not going to work.
Come
dude.
on.
What's like the ideal takeaway for, like, let's say a family leaving the museum? What do you want them to think other than, boy, some things sure are fun?
well, certainly we want them to walk away feeling that they had a good time. Absolutely. If you come to a museum of play and you leave and you didn't have fun and you didn't have an opportunity to play, then we're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
So everyone, we want to come away feeling that way. If they learn about the importance of play and the benefits of play throughout our lives, if they learn something about the history of play, then that's fantastic. As you probably know, in schools today, we spend a lot of time on academics. We spend less and less time playing. Recesses have gotten shorter. There are some communities, certainly in the United States, where kids don't go out and play recess. And so in many communities, play is sort of under attack in some ways. And so that idea that play is really central to who we are as human beings, and that it plays such an important role in who we become, and that we continue to do it throughout our lives, whether it's playing cards at the senior center, or as we all saw when Nintendo released the Wii, and the popularity of Wii bowling and those sorts of bowling leagues that arose. And I think those are the things that we want to get across. We want people to play together. We want them to love playing.
Yeah. There we go.
Great.
Hey, Jeremy, thank you for your time.
Thanks for your time, man.
Appreciate
You're very
it.
welcome.
That was just a clip from a larger show called The Game Informer Show. You can find it on iTunes, Google Play, or GameInformer.com. We take the fun opportunities and exclusive information from Game Informer magazine and boil it into a show that airs every Thursday with exclusive cover story information, developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So come love games with us.